Okay. Well, 6:04 p.m., our first meeting of the Ohio Citizens Redistricting Commission, our first public hearing, and it is quite an honor to be here with this amazing group of individuals, and really to have the honor to be a part of this group and to hear about what I think all of us here would agree is one of the most important issues facing our state, and it is the issue of how our districts are drawn so that we have fair representation when it comes to our government, whether it be that beautiful state house in Columbus, where we send our members of the Ohio House of Representatives, or our Ohio senators. Some former reps and senators were lucky enough to have here on the commission and know this process in and out. And whether it be our congressional members who we send to DC, but thinking about just how important it is that with Ohio embarking on a new process for how we draw congressional and state house districts, that we bring this Citizens Commission together. And we are a commission modeling a practice for how to engage with the public, how to do that critical work of going into communities, hearing from Ohioans about what fair districts mean to them, how their communities are important, why they want to, why it is important for them that we have fair districts and that they are well represented and that their representation is fair when it comes to their voice in Columbus and their voice in Washington. So I'm very honored to get to call this group to order. This commission, this is a first start, and there will be many opportunities for us to engage with the public, to hear from Ohioans. We're taking this virtual show on the road to hear from Ohioans in all corners of the state at this regular, and we'll release a schedule of our meetings, but this Thursday evening, twice a month, to be able to gather the data that we need to do the work with some really impressive allies that have signed on to draw and prepare fair maps to show Ohioans what that process looks like, to model the process, and hopefully help the important work of drawing the districts in this all-important year when the redistricting process is happening. So I'll kick it over to my esteemed co-chair, Greg Moore, to say hello and talk a little bit about why this group exists and how important our work is. And then we'll get right started into the hearing that I know you all want to discuss and hear from, and roll up our sleeves and get to work. So Greg, please take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Kathleen. It's so good to be co-chairing this with you. But I also want to thank you, as well as Janice Brock and all of my fellow commissioners who are here tonight, who are all distinguished leaders of their own right across the state, who've been advocates for redistricting reform. So I want to thank you for your commitment to serve on this commission with me. I also want to express my thanks to the thousands of Ohioans who signed petitions, circulated petitions, made phone calls, knocked on doors, passed out literature, testified in the legislature, made personal commitments, drafted language, all over several years. And that has led to the reform of the way Ohio now draws its congressional and legislative districts. The Fair Districts Ohio ballot measure won by over 72% of support from voters from across the state in every region of the state, from rural counties to urban centers, from red counties to blue counties. And it was all strong support through their signature of redistricting reforms that have been implemented in the new laws that we have in our Constitution now. So it's my hope that the legislature heard the voices of the people, will hear and continue to hear the voices of the people, and will follow in that suit as we get this process underway. I also want to thank all of the advocacy groups who joined with me, work side by side with my foundation, the Promise of Democracy and the Ohio Voter Fund in the middle of a pandemic to ensure that our hard to count communities were counted in the 2020 census. That was an important step, the first step in this process. So even when the US census virtually shut down, many of our advocacy groups kept working to make sure every Ohio resident was counted. So we move now on to the next step in that process. So while Ohio did see a slight growth in its population, it was not enough to offset the losses that we suffered as well. So Ohio will lose a congressional seat, unfortunately, but that makes our work on this commission even more important. So over the next few months, we will be working with you on this commission, and you who are listening. This commission will hopefully be the mouthpiece that will give the voice to the thousands of voters who have demanded fair maps that are truly representative of the people and the communities of interest. So the commission looks forward to hearing from all of those communities from every region of the state, and we will continue to help lift those voices throughout this process that begins tonight. So thank you again for the opportunity to be a co-chair of this great commission.
Great. Greg, thank you so much. And it's so fun to get to work with you on this after the years we've spent in the halls of the State House, fighting for fair districts, fighting for voting rights,
That's
and a whole host of other important things to so many Ohioans who were excited to get involved in this process. So I'm looking forward to this very much.
Thank you so much.
With that, I am going to turn it over to Janice, unless she waves and says I'm doing this wrong, to call the roll. And if we could call the roll, if we could do a little extra roll tonight, just because this is our first time getting together, if people could just take a minute and tell us more than just here, but who you are, who you're representing when you come to this commission, and maybe just a sentence or two about why fair districts are important to you, or how you joined this fight. And I'll just say, I think I know most of you very well, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Kathleen Clyde, former state representative, former county commissioner. I come from Kent, Ohio, up in Northeast Ohio. And I have a real passion for improving our system of government, whether it be fair districts, voting rights, fixing campaign finance. There's so many just kind of critical root issues that impact every issue that we care about. And I want to fight to make our system fairer. So that's how I come at this. I'm very excited to be here. And with that, Janice, if you could call our special roll tonight, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. I think we'll do this in a way that hopefully, you know what? I just realized everybody's screen is different, so it will look differently. So yeah, I'll just call the roll. I'll start with myself. My name is Janice Brock. I am currently the Policy and Advocacy Director at the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, and I'm proud and honored to serve on this commission as the OCRC secretary. I'll come in this space really making sure that we engage in a process that allows for all Ohioans to participate, and then also looking at these district lines and making sure that there is fair representation. I know I personally come from an area that is a split district. I'm from Akron, Ohio. So even on a congressional level, we are kind of split between OH11 and OH13, and it would just be really nice to have a congressperson that represents us so that we can be a priority in decision making and advocacy. So that's what brings me here today. I'm going to also pass it off to, I'm going to go with, let me see, Andre Washington.
Thank you very much, and I am honored to be here. My name is Andre Washington. I am the proud state president of the historic A. Philip Randolph Institute, the senior constituency group of the AFL-CIO. Asa Philip Randolph was considered the godfather of the Civil Rights Revolution. Asa Philip Randolph that organizes marches to help integrate public schools. A. Philip Randolph that won executive order to help desegregate the military. A. Philip Randolph that organizes the march in 1963 for jobs and freedom, where Dr. King gave his all-famous speech. A. Philip Randolph, a great American, a great humanitarian, a great man. And I'm honored to be here with these distinguished colleagues of mine. And I'm looking forward to hearing from the community so that we can pick our representatives and not our representatives pick us. Fair districts. Thank you, and God bless each and every one of you, and God can bless the work that we're going to do here in this commission. Thank you.
All right. Next on my screen is the other co-chair, Greg Moore.
Well, thank you. I'll be brief. Yes, I serve as the president of the Promise of Democracy Foundation and founder of the Ohio Voter Fund. Many of you also know me as serving 17 years as the executive director of the NAACP National Voter Fund. And so while I was spending several years in Washington, D.C., I have never forgotten about my roots in Ohio. In fact, I'm a graduate of Ohio University and even currently a graduating master's degree student at Ohio University. But more importantly, as Kathleen said, I've worked around the state, both in Columbus, across Northeast Ohio, to help register voters across the country, or across the state, fight for voting rights, fight against, as Kathleen and I did, the HB 194 ballot measure with Jennifer Bruner to stop the legislature from putting a massive voter suppression bill on. Obviously worked very closely with the state president of NAACP, Tom Roberts, and all the branches across the state, as well as with Andre Washington and A. Philip Randolph. Many of you on this call have worked and been involved with Coalition Sam, and I go way, way back as well. So many of you are in this fight and have seen me, and that's what brings me to this, whether it's signing a petition or being involved in the registration drive or testifying, and love my work with the Sykes family all across the board, and looking forward to working with Barbara Sykes as well in this latest endeavor. So thank you all.
I mean, that was beautiful. And since you gave so many accolades to this wonderful woman, we're going to pass it to Barbara Sykes.
Thank you, Janice. Hi, everyone. I'm Barbara Sykes, President and CEO of the Ohio Legislative Black Caucus Foundation. I have served as an elected official as well as a nonprofit official, serving as a council member of the Akron City Council, state representative, past state director for AARP, president and CEO of Ohio United Ways. And I am just pleased to be here because the separation between us and everyone else is a democracy. And this is democracy at work at its best. And I'm honored to join you.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Next, we have Sam Gresham.
You're muted, Sam.
Take care of that. I too have known a lot of people on this commission. My experience with redistricting goes back to 2000 was the beginning year, and then ROM in 2004, and ROM was the Reform Ohio Now. So I've been at this track for more than 21 years to get to this point. Most people know me as the president, chief executive officer of the Columbus Urban League in Columbus. I was also executive director of Common Cause. I was also executive director of the Commission on African American Males. So I've had a lot of job of advocating people. But for me, this is the culmination and the most important job I've ever had, drawing these districts right and the fight we're about to pursue. I look forward to battle with you. I look forward to engage the community in its creativity and drawing maps that meet the needs of the people of Ohio. Thank you for allowing me, and I look forward to the engagement.
Absolutely. Next, we have Dr. Greenbush, I'm sorry.
Hi,
I'm Dr. Ellen Green Bush. I'm a clinical psychologist by trade. I live in Port Clinton, Ohio, in the Northwest Ohio Snake Along the Lake district. I'm a strong proponent of democracy, and I work very hard as a volunteer to get big and dark money out of politics. And that really cannot happen until we change our district, our redistricting.
Awesome. Next, I have in front of me, Al Bannister.
Oh, good evening, everybody. I'm Alan Bannister. I'm up in Toledo, just outside of the Snake on the Lake. I'm in the 5th Congressional District, but the west side of town. And so redistricting means a lot to me as well. I've always been in Marcy Captor's district, but got pushed out last census. So I work for the Remington Road Group up here in Toledo, remotely now, and then we'll do some work in Columbus, but worked for 5 mayors in Toledo, and worked for Governor Ted Strickland in Columbus for 4 years. And I'm a proud member and president of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity in Toledo, Ohio.
Absolutely. Next, Jeremy Blake.
Hello, everybody. Greetings from Licking County in Newark, Ohio. It's just a pleasure to be here with all these compassionate and engaging Ohio leaders, both some old friends and new friends that I see on the call. And that as we begin this work, looking forward to getting to know everybody and to working towards justice. I proudly serve as a member of the Newark City Council, and also a board member of Equality Ohio and a lifetime member of the NAACP. I just believe that fair districts and voting rights are so critical to our society and to us as a people, and citizens being engaged in the process and having an open process that is just so vital. And just looking forward to seeing how this rolls out so that soldiers of justice can have their voices heard.
Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Liz Regula.
Hi, I'm Liz Regula. I'm here in Columbus, but most recently before that was also from Kent, Ohio, up in the northeast corner. I'm currently a lecturer down at University of Dayton and a member of the LGBTQ community. Really what brought me to this commission was my firm belief that all Ohioans need representation and need fair representation, and that's not what we have right now. Representation matters not just in the types of laws that get passed and unfortunately don't get passed sometimes, but also in our school funding, which I have a teen son, and you know, how many times do we have to have a school funding system get declared unconstitutional before we get something fair? Hopefully that'll change soon. And hopefully this commission and the redistricting process that's going on this year will get us to fairer representation overall. But I'm excited to be a part of this process and do what I can to help push Ohio forward.
Absolutely, thank you. Aki Butler.
Hello, everyone. My name is Aki Butler. I'm coming to you from Columbus, Ohio. I am currently a student organizer for the Ohio Student Association. I organize on the Ohio State campus and the Kent State University campus. I'm super excited to be a part of this, mostly because I come from a town that I feel was not represented fairly, if that makes sense. Yeah, so which is Youngstown, Ohio. So I'm just really excited to be a part of this and help bring some fairness to like the districting and everything. Thank you.
Okay, next, is it Omnia or is it, I don't
Yeah, you're spot on, Janice. I really appreciate it. It is Amina, the long vowels, the A. Thank you so much. What an honor to be here amongst esteemed colleagues. My name is Amina Barhoumi, and I am currently the Outreach Director at CARE Ohio, which is the Council on American Islamic Relations. I am a recipient personally and through my work, really of poorly drawn districts, and continuously see stories of individuals and not being represented in my work at CARE, and acknowledge that a free, open, transparent process is so critical to facilitate a space for citizens, Ohioans in particular, in our communities to be able to better partake. And so I'm glad to be a part of this. I'm very honored and look forward to working with you all.
All right, sounds good. Katie Shanahan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Shanahan. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Ohio State Director with All on the Line, which is a grassroots advocacy campaign, part of a national effort to end gerrymandering. So I come to this space not only because it's literally my job to fight for fair maps, but because I care deeply about this state, and I am tired of living in a state that doesn't make progress on issues that we care about and that affect our communities, not because there isn't public support for those issues, but because we have gerrymandered districts that get us legislators and congressional members who don't actually represent us. So I am so pleased, of course, to work with Janice and Prentice Haney, who have done so much work in getting this commission up and running, and am absolutely thrilled to be a part of this process with all of you, such esteemed commissioners, and am so glad to be a part of a commission that actually represents Ohio, because I think that that's actually really important. So looking forward to the work ahead, and so glad to get this process started.
All right, Dick Gunther.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dick Gunther, Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Ohio State University. I've studied electoral laws and redistricting, but my most important reason for being here is that I've been active in this process of trying to reform our redistricting ever since 2005. I believe that's when I met Sam on the Ron campaign. That was followed in 2009, where I participated in negotiations between then Speaker Armond Budish and then Senator John Husted. We actually reached agreement to completely alter the process and the criteria for the General Assembly redistricting process, but unfortunately couldn't get the Democrats in the Senate to go along. And as a result, this died at the last minute. In 2012, I was one of the authors of an initiative that was soundly beaten at the polls as a result of a very, very crooked and nasty campaign against us. Then in 2015, I was one of 5 authors of the amendments that went into the constitutional revisions of Article 11, which is basically concerning the procedures and criteria for changing the boundaries for the General Assembly of the state of Ohio. I was with one Republican, one Democrat, and their lawyers, and the 5 of us met for 39 hours behind closed doors before we finally brought it to the Senate and the House, and it was ultimately approved by the voters by 72%. Then in 2018, I was again author of an initiative. This one received 205,000 valid signatures, and that was sufficient to spook the Republican majority in the legislature into negotiating over the congressional district boundaries. That led to the creation of Article 19 of the Constitution. So in general terms, I've been active in this for 16 years, and I look forward to finally getting it across the finish line.
Thank you. Chris.
Hello all, very excited to be here. My name is Chris Tavener. I'm the staff attorney at the Ohio Environmental Council, and the climate crisis drives everything I do. And here in Ohio, turns out a majority of Ohioans want to see action on climate change, but our state house is not particularly responsive to that. And so in my mind, redistricting presents an opportunity for us to really change the game when it comes to environmental issues and a lot of other issues that we have, to make a maps that are truly responsive to the people as opposed to people who are in power. And in that same vein, I want to see, I see this as an opportunity for us to create a new approach to maps that ensure that people are being represented together in the places where they live, the shared environmental assets, the shared environmental risks. People who are dealing with the same things in their environment should be able to go to the same representative together to ask for help. And so that's what I'm happy to be here among all of you, and I'm excited to see how this process goes.
Yes, and last but not least, the Tom Roberts.
Well, I am not the Tom Roberts, but I am Tom Roberts. Let me on behalf of the leadership team, which includes Andre Washington, Prentice Haney, and Tom Roberts, thank you and our co-chairs for your willingness to take on this important leadership job, and for you as commissioners. I think I want to hinge on what both Dr. Gunther and Greg Moore talked about, and that was the 2015 battle, because that was the citizen, Barbara Sykes, Kathleen Klein, and I will tell you, those people across the street don't listen to citizens unless we hit them over the head with a 2x4. And that's what we did in 2015 and 18. And that's why we have to put the emphasis on the second word, the Citizens Commission. This is why we're going to go out and hear the citizens. We're going to hear what the people have to say all over the state, as Andre said this morning, clockwise, to hear what they want to tell us about drawing these maps. We have to keep in mind that it was the citizens who did the work in 2015, not the legislature. And as Richard will tell you, we had to sit, and Greg will tell you, we sat in those offices, the speaker and the president of the Senate, in the offices around the round table, League of Women Voters and other groups, telling them what we need to do, what they need to do. They were fearful that the citizens would do the same thing. In 2018, they did it 2015. That's why they listened. And that's why they're going to listen now. Because as we go across the state, hearing from the people, as my speaker, Vernon Rife, would always say, Barb, you know, the speaker would say, the people. And this is what the peoples need to speak up. And we're going to take their message, once we hear everything they have to say, to the legislature when we or others testify on behalf of the maps. So the work begins today, but I'm so excited because so many of you I've had the chance to work with or get to know over these years, but the heavy lifting for us, you know, there's only so many things in your lifetime that you must do. You must do the heavy lifting. And this is what the late, great senator said, this is good trouble. A representative said, this is good trouble. And let's get in some good trouble this year so we can celebrate the new maps and the new fair districts next year. So thank you all for being on the call. And Janice, thank you for those kind words of introduction.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for laying out the land for us and helping us understand the history that brought us here today. I think one of the most important things that we want to do is make sure that we are transparent and that people have a full understanding of redistricting in the process and where we can engage. So today, one of our commissioners, Katie Shanahan from All on the Line, has developed a presentation to help us understand the entire redistricting process and how we will be able to engage in that process. Katie, take it away.
Thank you, Janice. So I'm actually going to share my screen to go over all of this. There are two different sets of rules that guide how our districts will be drawn and the new rules that will guide what the districts have to look like. And these are all a direct result of those 2015 and 2018 reform measures that so many folks on the commission, but also who are tuned in tonight, were an integral part in getting passed. So I will start first by just talking about generally who actually runs the map drawing process. There are three main entities to keep in mind. I wish that this commission were actually in charge of drawing the maps because I think that they'd be much better than the ones that we're going to get in the official process. But there's a new 7-member commission that replaced what used to be called the apportionment board that will draw our new state legislative maps. And we'll talk about who those 7 members are in just a second. So that's one entity. The second is the Ohio General Assembly. So our state legislators, they are mostly in charge of drawing our new congressional maps. The Redistricting Commission does play a small role here, but it's mostly our legislators who will be in charge of drawing those new federal districts. And then the third entity to keep in mind is who actually judges what those maps look like. And that is, to start, the Ohio Supreme Court. Both the 2015 and 2018 reform measures gave the Ohio Supreme Court what's called original jurisdiction, which just means they are the first court who gets to review any future challenge on either set of maps. So whether it's the state legislative or congressional map, no matter what type of challenge you're bringing, you first stop at the Ohio Supreme Court. Whether you can go anywhere else depends on what type of legal claim you're bringing. So if you are bringing a partisan gerrymandering challenge, so you're saying, I think that these maps favor one political party over the other, the only court who will be able to review that case is the Ohio Supreme Court. That's because we can no longer go into federal court for partisan gerrymander claims. If, though, you're bringing a racial gerrymander claim, which is when race is a predominant factor in how districts are drawn, or you are bringing a claim based on a federal law like the Voting Rights Act or the US Constitution, you can still go into federal court, but only on appeal. So you would first go to the Ohio Supreme Court and then up into federal court. So these entities, especially the redistricting commissioners and the Ohio General Assembly, are some of our key advocacy targets when we're talking about who our official map drawers are. So they're the people who we're going to be bugging to actually start the process to host hearings like this, like we are tonight, to talk to people about the redistricting process and to draw fair maps. To go over the state legislative process, there are a couple of different steps here. It looks like a lot. It is a lot. This is the result of the 2015 redistricting measure. We completely overhauled how we will draw our state legislative districts. So that's our state house and state senate seats. And like I said, there's a new 7-member commission who's in charge of drawing those districts. And that commission is made up of the Ohio governor, secretary of state, and auditor, and then 4 legislative nominees, 1 each from each of the legislative leaders. So the Speaker of the House, the Senate President, and then the minority leaders from both chambers each nominate 1 person to serve on that commission. We don't yet know who those legislative nominees are because Governor DeWine has not yet convened this commission. So once he convenes that commission, then the legislative leaders can nominate their chosen folks to serve on this commission, and then we'll know who will be in charge of drawing our state legislative maps. In order to get a state legislative map, there are 3 main steps in the process. 2 of those steps get you a 10-year map, so a map that will last all the way until the next time we go through the census in 2030 and then into the redistricting process of 2031. And there's 1 option for a 4-year map. And we'll talk about what those 2 differences are to get to those different types of maps. There are deadlines by when our maps are due. And we'll talk about what you have to do to get maps by those certain deadlines. There are requirements across the board that are the same for each step in the process. So for a 10-year map, there has to be bipartisan support. So you have to have support from both Democrats and Republicans to get a 10-year map. If the Republicans want to pass a partisan map, they can do so, but that map will only be in place for 4 years. So that's the major difference in these steps of the process. So let's start in step 1. By September 1st of 2021, in order to get a 10-year map, you have to get at least 4 of the 7 commissioners, including at least 2 Republicans and both of the Democratic members, to sign on to that map. And you have to hold a certain number of hearings after you've publicly proposed maps, but before you actually vote on them. And if you can get that bipartisan support and you can host those hearings in time, then we have a 10-year map and we're good to go. If they can't meet that deadline, so maybe they can't get the map drawn in time, maybe they can't get that bipartisan support, then we move into step 2 and they get a one-time 2-week extension to try again, to get a bipartisan agreement on a 10-year map. So then by September 15th, if they can get, again, at least 2 of the Republican commissioners and both of the Democratic commissioners to sign on to that map after they hold at least 1 additional hearing, then we have a 10-year map. If they can't do that, so maybe they can't get to that bipartisan consensus, maybe they can only get one of the Democratic members to sign on, maybe they can get either of the Democratic members to sign on. The Republicans, because they have 5 of the 7 seats, they obviously hold a majority of the 7 seats, so they can still pass a map without that requisite level of bipartisan buy-in. That moves us into step 3, but that map would only be in place for 4 years. So maybe you're asking, well, why wouldn't they just go through the whole process since they control the commission and just draw a 4-year map? The main sort of stick hanging over their head to do that, aside from all the public pressure that we're going to put on them not to do that, is that the governor, secretary of state, and auditor are all up for re-election next year. And what happens in step 3A, which is at the bottom of the right-hand column, is if they pass a 4-year map this year, they have to come back in year 5 and go through the whole process again to get us a map that would last the rest of the decade. And if the Democrats win 2 of those 3 statewide races, you could change the balance of power for who actually draws the maps. So you would have a different composition of the commission in year 5. So that's another sort of thing that's hanging over their head to not draw 4-year maps. So that's actually how we get the state legislative maps. There are also, though, new rules that guide how those districts have to be drawn. And most of these rules are brand new. They were not in place 10 years ago. And these rules are incredibly important because they provide good guardrails against the worst forms of gerrymandering that we see in our current state legislative maps. So we'll start with some traditional criteria that a lot of states use. One is that district boundaries have to be contiguous. That just means that there's one non-interrupted, non-intersecting line that makes up the boundary of the district. So what you don't want is part of the district over here and then another little island over here that's not connected, right? You want them to all be in one place that has one line connecting the district boundaries. Another criteria is that the districts have to be compact. This usually isn't a huge concern with state legislative districts because you're dealing with a much smaller population, but still this is an important criteria to go to the idea, like Chris was talking about, the importance of keeping communities together as much as possible. The next couple of rules go to that same idea. So you'll see a lot of common themes here in the rules in trying to keep together our communities as much as possible. If you look at our current district maps, or even if you're just thinking about it, in my neighborhood, for example, to go to my grocery store, I have to cross a district boundary. I go out of my state house seat and I go into a different house district to go to the grocery store, just a 2-minute drive up the road. So we're trying to keep away from doing that, right? You're trying to keep communities together because that's what empowers communities to actually have political power as one unit. So there are rules, for example, about using existing boundaries. Where are there county lines, city lines, or township boundaries, and using those to actually guide where you're drawing districts. Trying as much as possible not to split up counties more than you need to. So for the House districts, for example, trying to fit as many whole House districts within county boundaries as you can, and only splitting off the remainder to one adjoining county to try to keep together people who live together as much as possible. The next criteria is actually about how we can make sure that we all have proportional representation. And this goes to the constitutional promise of one person, one vote. And that means that my vote is no more or less powerful than any of yours because we are all proportionally and equally represented in districts that are almost equally populated. So what you don't want to have is one district where there's 1 million people and another district where there's only 100 people, because that 1 million person district will be way underrepresented and the 100 person district would be way overrepresented. And so this criteria says that you can't have a huge variance in terms of how many people live in each district. You want to try to get districts that are within 5% plus or minus from each other in population size so that they're all about equally sized. The next 2 criteria are my absolute favorite. They're how we're going to stop partisan gerrymandering at the state legislative level. So the first is just a blanket ban on partisan gerrymandering. You cannot draw future state house or state senate seats that favor or disfavor one party over the other. The next criteria, though, gives teeth to that criteria. And this next criterion is actually unique to Ohio. We're the only state in the country to have this criterion. And we actually have Dr. Gunther to thank for this criterion because he was the one who helped write it and get it in there. This criteria requires that our districts have, or our maps have representational fairness. And what that means is that you have to have some close correlation between what the two parties, Republicans and Democrats, get in terms of the vote share that they actually win during elections and the seat share that they're likely to occupy in the districts. And to explain this, I'm actually going to go a couple slides back in this presentation to show you some pie charts. So across the decade, we've had a huge disconnect between how we actually vote as Ohioans and who actually wins the elections and occupies those seats. So I will die on the hill that Ohio is actually a purple state. We are just a rigged and gerrymandered state. So we appear much more red than we are. And what this criterion requires is that if you're only getting about 55% of the votes, which is what Republicans have gotten over the last decade, you should only be occupying about 55% of the seats, right? You shouldn't get an automatic 10% boost just because of the way that you've drawn the lines. Similarly, if you are getting 45% of the votes, you shouldn't only be getting 36% of the seats. You should also be getting around 45% of the seats. And this criterion will go a really long way, like I said, to ungerrymander our maps, right? We're trying to make sure that our votes actually equate to actual representatives occupying those seats. So really important criterion there. The final criterion is one that we've had for a long time. It's how we draw our state legislative districts. So in every single Ohio Senate seat, there are 3 contiguous or bordering House seats that are nested together. So every single Senate district has 3 whole House districts inside of it. So those are the new rules. I'm seeing some questions that are popping up, so I just want to make sure that I'm not missing any. I do see, Monica, your question about the congressional map. I'm going to answer that when we get to the next question. Let's see. I understand that the Republicans have the final say over anything the commission creates, and if so, how do we guarantee a fair system? Good question. So part of the advocacy during the redistricting process will be in fighting to get bipartisan maps, right? There's an interest in having 10-year long maps, partially because you want voters to know where their districts are, right? And who's likely to be their representatives. And candidates want to know where they're going to be running, right? You don't want to have districts that are new in the middle of the decade. You want to have some continuity across the 10 years to understand that this is your district, this is who's going to represent you, these are the communities that make up your district. And so there's a huge public interest in getting 10-year maps that last the entire decade, and also in making sure that they're fair. So there's going to be a lot of public pressure that will have to apply on the process to get bipartisan 10-year maps. You're right, though, to point out that there is nothing keeping Republicans from passing partisan maps that only last for 4 years. Our sort of defense against that is all of these rules that guide how the maps have to be drawn. So even if they're only 4-year maps, they still cannot be partisan gerrymandered. They still have to have representational fairness. They still have to keep our communities together. So even though they'll only last for 4 years, of course, we'll still be fighting that no matter how long the maps last, they're as fair as possible. So that will be a huge part of our advocacy work on the official process. And of course, we're going to be drawing fair maps, so you won't have to advocate that hard, right, against us. Okay, so now I'm going to go over the congressional process. This is a bit of a doozy. It's more complicated than the state legislative process. There are more steps. There are 2 entities in charge. But we'll get through this, we promise. So there are 4 main steps in this process. And like I said a couple slides ago, the legislature is who's mostly in charge of drawing these maps. So we start in step 1, and just like the state legislative process, before I start, there are a lot of similarities here, right? So you have multiple chances to get bipartisan 10-year maps. You also, like the state legislative process, have one sort of nuclear option at the end where you can pass partisan 4-year maps, but there's actually a little bit of an asterisk on that point that's different than the state legislative process. There are requirements at every single step to host public hearings after maps have been proposed, but before they get voted on. That's extremely important because it means that we are guaranteed to have our voices heard after they actually publicly propose maps. And then there's, like I said, required amount of support for both Republicans and Democrats at every step of the process. So in step one, the legislature gets the first attempt to draw a 10-year map. And they have to do that by September 30th of 2021. In order to get a 10-year map, they have to get at least 60% support from both chambers, including at least 50% from the Democratic members in both chambers. So that's your threshold for bipartisan support in this step. If they can get that amount of support and host their public hearings by September 30th, then we have a 10-year congressional map. If they can't do that, we go to step two. Step two takes it out of the legislature and goes to the 7-member commission who just finished drawing our state legislative maps. And then that commission has an additional month to try to get a bipartisan 10-year map. And then their rules apply. So same as with the state legislative maps, in order to get a 10-year map, you've got to get just 4 of the 7 members to sign on, but that includes at least 2 Republicans and both of the Democratic members. And if they can do that after they've held their hearings, if they can get that level of bipartisan support by October 31st, then we have a 10-year map and we're good to go. If they can't do that, it goes back to the legislature, and then the legislature has 2 more attempts to draw the map. Step 3 is their last chance to get a 10-year map. By November 30th, in order to get a 10-year map, they have to get, again, at least 60% support in both chambers, but this time they only have to get 1/3 of the Democratic caucuses. So that's different than the first step where they had to get 50% of the Democratic caucuses. So a little less of the Democratic support that's required here in this step 3, but still bipartisan support required for those 10-year maps. And public hearings required here too. So if they can get that level of bipartisan support by November 30th, then we have a 10-year map. If they can't do that, they've got one last option, that's step 4. And this is where they can pass a partisan 4-year map with just a simple legislative majority, which obviously the Republicans have, and then some because they've got super majorities in both chambers. If though they pass this 4-year map, there are not only an additional set of rules that apply to those maps that are different than all the rules that apply to the other steps, which we'll talk about in a second. They're under the same sort of pressure that the statewide officers who are commissioners in the state legislative process have. So in 4 years, you've got multiple election cycles of state legislators, and those maps are drawn by the commission. And so you might have one of the chambers flip control. So you might have in year 5, when they have to come back to go through this whole process again, controlled by the Democrats and not the Republicans. So you might have a different composition of the legislature and a different set of negotiators who are going through this process. The extra rules, though, I think are going to be the biggest sort of stick hanging over their head, not to pass those 4-year maps. Again, at the bottom right-hand corner, step 4A just explains what happens if they do pass a 4-year map this year. They come back in year 5, they go through the whole process again, no matter where they land. That map is then in place for the remainder of the decade. So that's the congressional process. I know that was a lot, and I'm seeing some questions. So from Greg, how likely is it that the Democratic leadership will go along with a 10-year map that doesn't balance the scales? I don't know. I wish I had a crystal ball to tell you how this is all going to play out. Obviously, a huge part of all of our advocacy efforts, this is true for the state legislative and congressional process, is for our map drawers to come to a bipartisan consensus to draw maps that are representative of Ohio and responsive to the will of our voters. Ohioans, like Greg was saying at the beginning, overwhelmingly supported these reform measures. We sent a very clear message to our map drawers that we want fair maps drawn in a transparent process, and we won't accept anything else. So there are a ton of organizations who are already organizing around this issue, getting folks plugged into this work, because it's going to take an immense amount of public pressure on our official map drawers to draw maps that are fair and are representative of Ohio, and to make sure that they are actually representative of us and that they last for 10 years. So that's how the process works. Now let's go talk about the rules that guide how the maps actually have to be drawn. So you'll see some similarities here. These district lines also have to be contiguous. So again, that's just one non-interrupting, non-intersecting line that makes up the boundary of the district. 10-year maps also have to be, the districts have to be compact. So if you're thinking about our congressional districts, so my congressional district is CD 12, and I live in Clintonville, which is a neighborhood in northern Columbus, about a 10-minute drive from the State House. And my congressional district goes an hour north to Mansfield and an hour east to Zanesville. And there are fine people who live in those two cities, but I have no business being in that district, right? So you're trying to avoid these sprawling districts that go across the state and bring together communities that do not have a lot in common. If you're thinking about Rep. Jim Jordan's Duck District, right? The tail of that district is almost at the Indiana border. The beak is almost all the way up by Lake Erie. That is a ridiculous district. No district should look like that moving forward. The Snake on the Lake is another great example of this. Toledo and Cleveland are not a monolith. They are two very different communities. They should not be in the same district. You're trying to avoid those sort of sprawling districts in these maps. The next two sets of rules are again about protecting how well we can keep communities together as much as possible. So the first rule here is about how many counties you're allowed to split under the new maps. So Ohio has 88 counties. In our current congressional map, 55 of our counties are split between 2, 3, or 4 congressional districts, which is absolutely unnecessary because Ohio is a state filled with small and medium-sized towns and villages and cities and counties that deserve to be included in their entirety within districts. So these rules set up a rubric for how many counties you're allowed to split, if at all. So 65 of our 88 counties have to be kept whole, 18 are allowed to be split once, and 5 are allowed to be split twice. That's not a requirement. You can actually draw a map with only 7 or 8 county splits. So you don't need to split 18 once or 5 twice, but you are allowed to. But again, this rule is the thing to keep in the back of your mind is trying to keep communities together as much as possible. And that's true for this next set of rules about how we protect our major metropolitan cities. So Columbus is too big. We have to be split in our congressional district. We can't all fit into one, but there are rules about how you draw Columbus's anchored district by being more responsible and keeping together that district centralized around Franklin County with Columbus and its suburbs intact. Cleveland and Cincinnati cannot be split apart. This will mean a huge difference in what our map looks like, and actually goes to Monica's question that she asked earlier, which is, like Greg said at the beginning, Ohio will lose our 16th congressional district. So we'll go from 16 to 15 congressional districts. And so a lot of people are saying, well, where's that district going to come from? And this rule actually will have the most impact in terms of what our future maps look like and your thinking behind where that 16th district will go. It's not so much that you're just combining 2 districts together, but because Cleveland and Cincinnati cannot be split apart, if you think about our current districts, Cleveland is split into 4 different congressional districts. Cincinnati is split into 2 different congressional districts. If you draw all of Cincinnati and you try to get that district anchored inside Hamilton County, you actually take off pressure from the rest of the map from needing to figure out where that 16th district goes. If you are drawing Cleveland together in and around Cuyahoga County, right, you're taking pressure off of needing to split up other places because you are drawing those places all together rather than cracking them apart like they are now to dilute the political power of the people who live there. Unfortunately, for other major cities like Akron, Dayton, and Toledo, there are no explicit protections against splitting them apart. That does not mean that they should be split apart. They absolutely should not be. All of those cities should be contained in their entirety within new districts. So if you're thinking about the Snake on the Lake, if you uncrack that district and you anchor that around all of Toledo, you can include all of Lucas County. That's a vastly different looking district, right? If you include all of Toledo, or I'm sorry, all of Akron in a district, Janice earlier was talking about how Akron is split apart and it doesn't really feel like they have any one representative who's solely focused on Akron. If you draw all of Akron in one district, that takes a lot of pressure off of where you've got to figure out where that 16th district goes. This next rule goes to that same theme. You're trying to include at least one whole county within every single congressional district. This requirement obviously doesn't apply for counties like Franklin County, where Columbus is, because you have to split us up. We're too big to fit into one district. And it certainly doesn't apply where doing so would violate either state or federal law. This last bullet point, and then I promise I'm done. This last bullet point is the extra set of rules that the 4-year congressional maps have to meet. So you'll remember that I said that there was a big asterisk on that 4-year step for the congressional. So this is different than the state legislative process, where the rules are the same, no matter if it's a 10-year or a 4-year map. In the congressional process, only if it's a 4-year map do we see an explicit ban on partisan gerrymandering. There is no explicit ban on partisan gerrymandering for 10-year congressional maps. You see stricter rules against unnecessarily cutting apart counties, townships, or cities if you draw a 4-year map. You also only have to attempt to draw compact districts, whereas for a 10-year map, you're required to draw compact districts. And then the final additional criteria doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, but it's actually very important. The last criteria that they have to meet if they draw a 4-year map is that the legislators have to include a written statement that explains how they met these additional criteria. And the reason that's important is there are 2 reasons. First is during the process itself. So after the legislators, if they're going to pass a 4-year map, when they propose this, we as advocates will have a written testimony explaining why they drew the map that way and why they think it meets all of these additional criteria. And then you can combat that in your testimony. It's also, though, important for potential litigation on the maps themselves, because that's your evidence about what their intent was in how they drew the districts. So these additional criteria, if it were up to me, they would apply for the entire process. And certainly we should be advocating that they apply for the entire process. We shouldn't be partisan gerrymandering 10-year congressional maps. But this is an additional set of rules that potentially changes the strategy behind whether or not the legislators actually want to push for a 4-year map, because you might actually get a better map under that step than you would in the 10-year map. I know that that was a lot. It was very, very quick, but that's the redistricting process. Like I said, what is so important about those reforms is that they place really good guardrails against the worst forms of gerrymandering that we have today. What I will say, though, is that those reforms alone will not deliver us fair maps. That's where we come in. We have to push on our legislators to uphold the promise of those reform measures and to draw the fairest maps possible, which is also where this commission comes in, because we're going to be pressuring them too. So thank you, Janice, for letting me share. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I will turn it back over to you.
Katie, thank you so much for that and your legal expertise, along with the quite a few lawyers that we have here and doctors on this commission. You don't have to be a lawyer or a doctor to advocate for fair districts, but it is certainly going to be helpful to have that expertise. And turning now, speaking of expertise, we have Dr. Heather Rosenfeld here, one of the partners of our Ohio redistricting model redistricting commission is the MGG redistricting lab at Tufts University. Has been incredibly helpful. I've just touched on a little bit. I know we all met them briefly and have heard of all of the work that they have been doing in collaboration with the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, NAACP, and others in standing up this commission. And Heather, I want to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about the importance of the data analysis and sort of our goals for the commission when it comes to analyzing data. We're so glad you're here, and please share with us.
All right, so I will be a lot more brief than Katie, who outlined, I think, a lot of the things that will hopefully prevent us from creating bad maps. I think that Katie outlined a lot of the constraints there. What we're hoping our participatory mapping process and our data analysis and mapping can do is help us get away from, we've stopped a bad map and we can hopefully get a good map that represents all of the important communities that have so far been excluded from being represented. And so I'll say, if two things stick with you from what I say, it's that neutral public outreach will reinforce the status quo. And that means that if you just say everyone can participate, that means the voices that are already heard, the voices that already have power are going to keep speaking and going to keep being heard. And that same thing applies to participatory mapping. Neutral participatory mapping will reinforce the status quo. And so I think that what we, all of you, are working on is not doing neutral public outreach, reaching the communities that need to be heard. And what we'll be doing is the same thing, working with you all so that you can do participatory mapping that reaches the communities who need to be on the map, who need to be preserved in districts and not have their voices diluted. And that's both an outreach process and a technical process. And so we'll be providing support on the participatory mapping side, but also providing support on the data analysis side in terms of we'll be providing updates along the way. As people start submitting maps, we'll be able to say, hey, nobody submitted a map from Columbus. Nobody submitted a map from certain parts of Akron. That's where that outreach needs to get done. It seems like there are major communities in a certain area that aren't on the map. Can someone go and reach those communities? That kind of work. And then we'll also be doing work to synthesize the community narratives that we receive. And so hopefully we'll be able to make sure that all of the voices that haven't been represented well before are able to be represented. We're working with a team of folks, geographers, mathematicians, and political scientists at Ohio State University. And so they'll also be involved with a lot of the process in terms of participatory mapping strategy, in terms of that narrative synthesis and all of that. And that is, that's all I have to say for now. So thank you all.
Heather, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and all that has been put into this with all of our partners. And we're so excited to get to work and see all of this play out and put into action that you've set up for us and for Ohioans. It's very exciting. Thank you. I am going to kick it over to Janice to talk about our next hearing and sort of our schedule for hearings to come.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for everyone who presented today. And thank you to everyone who showed up today. This was definitely our introductory commission hearing. Our hope was to give you a firm foundation and truly understand how this process works. So I appreciate you for hanging in there with us and being able to learn a little bit more about how this process works. There will be opportunities for you all, folks in your networks and your communities, to participate at these public hearings. The next public hearing will take place on Thursday, May 27th at 6:00 p.m. That's Eastern Standard Time. I'll drop some information in the chat where you can register to attend. If you want to give public testimony, kind of share things about who you are, your community, and maybe how gerrymandering has affected you, or why you want to be involved in this process, or any questions you may have for us, you will be able to give that testimony and submit that as well. We also have an opportunity for you to follow us and understand what the commission is doing through social media. So whether it be through Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, or just visiting our website, we'll have opportunities where you can follow our work, follow all of these amazing commissioners and the work that they're doing as we move through this process. Just to keep in mind and to keep track about, how and when hearings will take place. If you can mark your calendars for every second and fourth Thursday of every month from May to September. So every second and fourth Thursday. So every second and fourth Thursday, we're going to be hosting public hearings. You'll be able to invite your folks. We're also going to release a specific schedule so you would know the areas of the state that we'll be engaging, because essentially, we're not able to be in person, but we're going to take a bus tour, virtual bus tour throughout the state. And we're going to start on Thursday, May 27th in the Toledo area. So if you know folks in Toledo and they have stories about how gerrymandering has affected them, or if they just want to share a little bit more about their community so they understand like where that community starts and where it ends, please be sure to share the link for the public testimony or have them register to attend so that we can hear from them. That is what I have so far. Thank you again for attending and learning a little bit more about this process. Go ahead.
Can I sneak in there before you close that piece and just say, number one, Al Bannister, you are up. We're excited to be in Toledo. But Janice, is it 6 p.m. or are we still, do we know it's going to be every Thursday that you listed at 6, or are we still adjusting on the times?
Nope, time is gonna be at 6 every second and fourth Sunday. Sorry. Every second and fourth Thursday at 6 o'clock.
6 p.m.
Yeah. So shout out to Al, you are up. And then I'll turn it back over to our co-chairs, Greg and Kathleen, to give us some closing remarks, and following that, adjourn.
Let me go first and then maybe have Kathleen close this out. I want to first of all thank Katie and also thank Heather for those great presentations. I know I've sat through a lot of meetings about this and I learn something new every time. So don't be bashful if you find out that you are learning something new each week or every other week or every time you hear something, because this is an extremely complicated process, but every single word, as Dick Gunther will tell you, was written with precision. And the kind of people and wealth of knowledge we have on this commission really makes a difference. So thank you again for the presentations and for those of you who asked questions. And again, study over the next 2 weeks and we're looking forward to the next hearing. Thank you. Kathleen?
Greg, I'll second that. And I feel like this is the hearing where we kind of go over the nuts and bolts and we're hearing from our esteemed commissioners like Katie about the process and the technicalities, but from here on out on the next big set of hearings as we're going around, it is hearing from people. It is hearing about the input that we need to be able to really kind of gather that data that Heather and Katie had talked about, and to produce the fairness that I think all of us, that brings us here every second and fourth Thursday for the next several months. So this is about setting that foundation. I think there'll be a lot of questions as we go forward from us and from the public, and that's good. That's what this process should look like. And but what I think all of us are excited is to shift into let's hear from the public, let's hear from citizens, let's hear from Ohioans, and that's what we should look forward to on our second and ongoing set of hearings. So with that, I want to thank everyone. It is so nice to see all of you. I know that commissioners are staying to have a discussion afterward, but at this point in time, I am going to bring our public session of this commission to a close. We will see you all again on Thursday, May 27th at 6 p.m. To the public and commissioners, stand by. Our discussion will continue privately going forward. Thanks everyone in the public, and thanks so much for tuning in and for caring about this important issue.
No, the first part is over.
Janice, are we?
We're almost there.
Okay, just give us a signal.
Okay.
Should Prentice be on?
No, I think, no, he said no,
Okay.
he wouldn't be on. No.
Okay. Janice, do you want me to hop off for this section? I can give you the hosting ability.
I think I want you to talk about the one portion about the interview. So I think you might want to, as the comms.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will stick around.
I think I will jump off, but please, please, please reach out with questions as you run into them.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you. You're doing the hard work.
Probably, I think we can stop the recording too.